Hi guys, welcome back. This week we're going to be discussing domestic violence. Now the PowerPoint I'm going to be showing you today, you don't have the handouts for, but don't fret, I'll go ahead and I will be sharing these online. Okay. So today we're going to be discussing what domestic violence is, why people might stay, why people hurt others, underserved populations, and we're going to touch on victim blaming a little bit. So domestic violence is any abuse between two people who are or were in an intimate partner relationship. So sometimes I know I've had phone calls where people say, I'm in the middle of a domestic violence dispute and my roommate, da 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 da. That's not considered domestic violence. And we're going to go through the definitions in just a moment. But domestic violence is between intimate partners. Okay. So some definitions of domestic violence. The California Partnership to End Domestic Violence defines it as a range of behaviors, okay, used to establish power and exert control by one intimate partner over the other. Secondly, domestic violence is a pattern of assaultive and coercive behaviors that adults or adolescents use against their current or former intimate partners. So domestic violence is a learned behavior. Somebody who witnesses domestic violence as a child is at much higher of a risk to either be with somebody in a domestic violence relationship, or they're more likely to become a perpetrator. It's one of the strongest risk factors, of repeating what we call the cycle of violence. And it's also a choice. It's a choice to harm somebody else. Yes, alcohol and drugs may influence behavior or actions, but the person who harms is still in control and can be abusive without taking drugs or alcohol. Some examples are when somebody will physically harm somebody else in non-visible places. ER physicians will notice injuries in areas that are really covered up a lot in the summertime. A person may be, because they can't be physically abused like on their arms or their legs, the focus of violence is on like their abdomen, or somewhere that people aren't really going to be able to see. I have a quote here from a literacy program counselor. Okay. And he said, the person who harms argues with my client before school every day. She can't concentrate. I have to talk to her every morning to calm her down and focus her. I have another client who is close to getting her GED. He broke her right arm. She's right-handed. As soon as it healed, he broke it again, and she was in a cast again. You have to call it sabotage. It's not just anger. Women have to recognize it for what it is. And I'll say women and men need to recognize domestic violence for what it is. It's also influenced by societal and institutional responses, right? People are continuously getting away with domestic violence. Institutions are silent, communities are silent, families keep quiet. Law enforcement and courts have historically sided with people who harm, and even now it's a struggle for victims to get the appropriate resources they need and support that they need from the legal and criminal justice system. There are certain programs that support survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault through crime victims assistance that we'll get to later. But it's found in all levels of society too. People often think that people who are disadvantaged financially are likely going, like that's one of the reasons why people have domestic violence relationships. But really it's you got to think about other people like Rihanna, who was in the news, and other people, other celebrities that you've seen in the news who are battling or trying to overcome domestic violence. It's not that simple, right, as a socioeconomic status. However, people who are escaping a domestic violence situation are more likely to become impoverished or homeless, at least for a little bit, due to the transition of getting on one's own feet. California legal definition of abuse. Abuse is defined as intentionally or recklessly causing or attempting to cause bodily injury or placing another person in reasonable apprehension of imminent serious bodily injury to himself, herself, or another. That's abuse. Now, domestic violence is defined as an abuse committed against an adult or minor who is a spouse, former spouse, cohabitant, former cohabitant, or person with whom the suspect has had a child or is having or has had a dating or engagement relationship. Excuse me. All right, let's get back. I had a visitor stop by and I had to answer my door. So let me go back to screen share. Okay. Okay, one more definition. And this definition is not domestic violence, it's called intimate partner violence. Okay. It refers to behaviors by an intimate partner or ex-partner that causes physical, sexual, or psychological harm, including physical aggression, sexual coercion, psychological abuse, and controlling behaviors. So that's by the World Health Organization. Now we're going to go over some of the types of abuse. Now, oftentimes people associate like a black eye or a bruise or something with domestic violence, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. So this is what we call the power and control wheel. And this is something that I use with every single client. And you'll see it doesn't say domestic violence on it. It says power and control. So these are the different aspects you'll see that are different parts of ways that somebody can be manipulated or somebody can lose their power or lose control over their own life. So intimidation, putting somebody down, it could even just be like a gesture or a look. Emotional abuse, putting somebody, like making somebody feel bad about themselves, name calling, making somebody think that they're crazy or that they're not understanding a situation appropriately, making them question themselves or their intuition, right? Isolation, controlling who you see, what you do, who you talk to, where you go. Economic abuse is trying to keep somebody from being financially stable on their own. Sexual abuse is making somebody do sexual things against somebody's will. I mean, even if it's just advances or if somebody's talking to you in a sexual way and you say, I don't really like that very much, and they continue to do it. Okay, sexual abuse. Gender bias is, going back to the historical, women stay at home, men are the bread earners, and they make all the decisions, right? Just it could either go, it could go in many different ways, but that's just one example. Okay. Threats, making or carrying out threats to hurt you emotionally, physically, Sometimes that means like threats that they're going to commit suicide themselves, or reporting that person, all sorts of threats, right? For us, when we talk about power and control, we also really want to talk about using children. And sometimes it's, telling the child to give a message to mom, or, putting the children in the middle of a domestic violence situation. So these are all just different aspects of power and control. And of course, you'll see physical abuses on the outside, right? Oftentimes there will be certain levels of abuse, and it escalates and escalates and escalates. And you'll see that usually with physical abuse, there is some other type of abuse happening at the same time. So physical abuse, sexual and reproductive abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, financial or economic abuse, spiritual abuse, legal abuse, and technological or cyber abuse. These are all included in domestic violence. So when we talk about physical abuse, that could be hitting or punching, throwing objects. It could be damaging somebody else's property or reckless driving, keeping somebody from leaving or entering maybe a room or a house, locking somebody out of the house, depriving somebody of their basic needs of food, water, or sleep, attacking with a weapon, and of course, murder. Okay. Some examples of sexual and reproductive abuse. It's rape or marital rape. Demanding or forcing sexual intercourse when the other person is not interested, doesn't want it. Okay. Molestation, exposure to pornographic materials, denying somebody the use of contraception or sabotaging proper use of that contraception, forcing unwanted pregnancy, or an unwanted abortion, withholding sex and affection as punishment, and revenge porn. Revenge porn refers to a situation where between the intimate partners, there is maybe video or photographs that are sexual in nature. And once the relationship ends, the person threatens to, or does, post it on social media or share it with their family. That's what we talk about that's what we're referring to when we talk about revenge porn. Okay. Psychological and emotional abuse, right? It's verbal, or manipulation, attacking somebody else's vulnerabilities. Usually with an intimate partner, you're going to share with them more than you would share just with the normal, regular person walking on the street, right? And so they know your vulnerabilities, and if they are using your vulnerabilities against you, red flag. But yeah, emotional or psychological abuse. Okay. Name calling, threatening to use violence towards a pet or a family member or themselves, threatening to kidnap the children or the pets, isolation, giving somebody the silent treatment, lying or manipulating a situation, encouraging self-blame, right? As somebody says, oh, I'm sorry I did that, and they say, yeah, you should be sorry, right? Or just, blaming themselves for whatever kind of incident happened, right? I mean, we can never make somebody else hit us, right? But oftentimes you'll hear, and it's really hard to unravel with clients, that they are not at fault for the actions of their spouse or their intimate partner or ex-intimate partner. Okay. And then of course, stalking somebody at home or in public has tremendous emotional and psychological, like, it wrecks a person. And we're gonna have an entire day dedicated to stalking. Okay. Now, when we're talking about financial and economic abuse, we're talking about controlling access to money, sabotaging somebody from going to work, which would then lead to financial stability. Or did I say work? I meant school. That would then lead to financial stability. Refusing to work, or forcing somebody else to support the family. Running up credit cards in the other person's name, or using the other person's identity to apply for a loan or a credit card. And spiritual abuse. Denying somebody the ability to worship however they would feel is appropriate. Ridiculing their religion, destroying, if they've got paintings or an offering set up, destroying that, or using the religion to control the behaviors or the actions of the other person. Now, in that, just it doesn't go just as far as an intimate partner, but you could also have like a member of the clergy, spiritual abuse, which I'm not going to get into right now, but interesting stuff. And then technological or cyber abuse, of course, we're seeing that's more and more as TikTok and Instagram become more and more popular. Okay. And some of these you're going to find that you might think that, oh, that just sounds normal, right? Like right now, I am sharing my location with many of my friends, right, including my husband, and that's not a form of cyber abuse, right? If I didn't call him back and he checked up on me and he looked through my location, I wouldn't feel like that was abusive, right? But it's all about the context. Okay, so if somebody is tracking the location to, I don't know, find you and track you down, and it's constant, right? Or it's against your will if you don't want them to do it, and they coerce you to do it, or they download a spyware on your computer or your phone so that they can track your activities. Right? That's a whole different level, right? Recording and uploading sexual activities or photos without permission, right? We're talking about revenge porn. Posting anything online that you don't want them to, something that's humiliating. Forcing somebody to check in frequently wherever they are. Hacking an email or social media accounts. Once you get in there, it can be hard to kick someone out, and it can get really messy. And I'm looking forward to the rest of our semester together so that I can get more into all of these things. It's so funny because when I'm supposed to be just brushing over these, and I keep holding myself back from wanting to tell you stories and get into the thick of it. But this is just an introduction to domestic violence, so we're just gonna breeze through here. Okay, some examples of legal abuse: threatening to divorce somebody, threatening to take all the assets, right? I'm going to take the car, and I'm going to take custody of the children, and you're never going to see Lucky again. Withholding any identification that you might need to travel or leave your license, or just withholding that kind of information. Promising to help their partner file for legal status and then just never doing it. And also threatening to report to immigration. And I'll just really quickly say one thing. People who are immigrants are of a lot higher of a risk of losing their power and control over their own situation. I mean, even if say I have a client who's here on a work visa, their partner could say a lot of things to make that person nervous, right? I'm going to report that, I don't know, it could be a lie. It could say, I'm going to report that you're also cleaning houses on the side, or you're also, you know, involved in something you shouldn't be. It could be anything, really. But that is putting at risk their livelihood, you know. Somebody has come here and started over, and they have friends and family here, and all of that is at stake. Their whole lives are at stake and under the control of one person. So you can only imagine how nerve-wracking that must be. Okay, so somebody's going through all these types of abuse, and you know, it's like, well, why don't they just leave, right? Well, it's not really as simple as that. And furthermore, here's a quote by the World Health Organization. It says, evidence suggests that most abused women are not passive victims. They often adopt strategies to maximize their safety and that of their children. So they're not just, passive, allowing the abuse to happen. They're doing everything in their power to maintain stability and safety for their children. Okay, and some of the barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. Fear is absolutely real. Leaving is the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship. The majority of victims who do leave end up in poverty. Most common reason for survivors returning to their abusive relationship is, or is it financial support? Okay. There we go. That is all of them. Right. So yeah, like we were saying, fear is very real. Guilt, you know, maybe they were manipulated to feel guilty about something, or maybe they do feel guilty about something. They don't want to take the kids away, split up a family. Maybe they're really sorry, effects of doing stuff at home. You know, maybe it's within their social norms that abuse is common in their culture. They stay out of love. Maybe they don't have, or they don't perceive that they have the options to leave. And we're going to get into victim blaming in a second, and some of the different, some of the other aspects we're going to get into too. We're definitely going to be covering all of these throughout the course. So don't fret, but do know that it's not easy to leave a domestic violence situation, okay? Now, families can put up many large barriers to a survivor leaving or seeking help. Relationships with family and loved ones can become very complicated throughout the process of leaving a domestic violence situation. Being silent, or there's silence about violence. So, you know, maybe people are seeing that there is some violence in the home, but they're not saying anything about it, or the person who's being abused isn't saying anything. Okay. Intergenerational violence in family, right? The family is used to this type of behavior and they don't see anything wrong with it. Or they are, they could have not processed what happened to them and therefore are projecting it being okay for somebody else. Maybe they're not offering to help when a survivor will leave the relationship and return. That can be very exhausting. I completely understand for other family members. I actually have a family member who's going through this right now. And, I'm trained in this, so I know not to give up, and I know to, go forward with the positive reinforcement, even though I get really frustrated. You know, there's not really much I can do. But I know that some of the other family members have completely cut this person off because they keep going back to the abusive partner. And when he calls me, he says, you're the only person that I have that's a family member, right? I say, of course not. We all love you and so we support you, but they're tired, and they want the best for you, and it hurts them to see you go through this. And I think it's just a defense mechanism so that they can stop feeling the pain, right? So that's another reason why we as advocates are so, so important, because sometimes we are the only person who believes and sees and honors what they're going through, okay? Additionally, the in-laws are likely to side with the partner who's causing the harm. And this can make the process of leaving that person that much more difficult, okay? Especially when we're talking about if there's children involved, assets, and it can just get really, really, really complicated. But I've added this phrase here. It says, one act of violence takes 4 generations to heal. So I just want you to let that one sink in again. One act of violence takes 4 generations to heal. So while, say, if I actually grew up in family violence, right? So I know that I'm still healing from that. And I know that when I talk about it, right? Well, I actually have a lot of education and background and skill set around it. So I know it more, I'm more familiar with how it affects me. Therefore, I'm more aware. Therefore, I understand my triggers, and therefore I yada, yada, yada. But generally speaking, it takes a while for a family to be able to flush out violence that's happened. And if somebody hasn't processed a situation or a circumstance that had led to violence, or a violent circumstance that happened within the family, then, like I was saying before, it's just much more likely that they're going to accept that type of behavior, or encourage that person to stay with an abusive partner, right? Because they haven't completely healed from it. Now, how many of you have heard of victim blaming before? She shouldn't have worn that, and he should have known better. Victim blaming is blaming the victim for the crime that was committed against them. Now, why do we victim blame? So I'm actually going to show you a short clip from, let's see. Okay. Now, I'm sure all of you can kind of relate to that situation, right? I mean, even I can. And not talking about like, you know, with sexual assault or domestic violence, but just, you know, well, that serves that person right. That, you know, I don't know, somebody, yeah, gets hit by a car and it's like, well, you know, that person was homeless, so it was only a matter of time or something, right? We're all guilty of victim blaming in some way, shape, or form. But when we talk about victim blaming, when it comes to sexual assault and domestic violence, it's a lot more hurtful, and it can really prevent people from discussing or getting out of a violent situation. And I would even go as far as saying that victim blaming of sexual assault and domestic violence can lead to death. Absolutely. Okay. And it hurts me so bad when I hear it, especially if I'm on like live air and the person that I'm talking to is victim blaming. It's really hard for me to be appropriate, right? So just be mindful of that. And you know, you really don't want to do it in this class. It's not going to win you any brownie points. So let me go ahead and find, oh, and I have another one I want to show you, which will come up in a moment. Okay, so we're not going to do a group discussion because that's a little bit more tricky right now, but I want you to think about victim blaming, right? What is it to you? What's some examples that you've actually, like ways that you've been somebody who is victim blaming, right? And then I want you to think about how might victim blaming prevent victims from leaving their relationships or seeking help? I kind of just told you I shouldn't have done that. But also, how can we rephrase or rethink issues and circumstances regarding victim blaming? So if you're somebody who victim blames a lot right now, that's fine, right? We'll work through it. Knowledge is power. But I do want you to kind of think about the way that you say things, and be mindful and catch yourself if you're victim blaming in the future. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you an audio clip of a 911 call. And when we talk about why people don't leave, or barriers, and how, you know, family dynamics can get in the way, I just want you to keep that in mind when you're listening to this. Okay, are you ready? As you're listening to this, try to think about all the different dynamics of abuse and manipulation that this family has had to endure. Now, do you think the child was telling the truth? Yes or no? Oh. Okay, so could be a little hard to hear, right? To emotionally process, right? So I want to ask you some questions, right? So what were the dynamics that were going on, right? Why was the little boy saying that he didn't want the police to come? And he kept saying, it's okay, it's okay. When he handed Dad the phone, he said, Dad, tell them that everything's okay. Do you think he'd ever been his younger sister where he was really scared? So, yeah. So I just want you to kind of think about that, and how domestic violence affects all family members. Okay. All right. Okay, and the other one is, here we go. Now, when we talk about people not wanting to leave, right? Now we're like, why didn't that woman tell the officer what's going on, have the officer come by and arrest the husband? Well, these women have very strongly come out and explained to people why they stayed.
It's the question that I'm asked the most. Why did I stay? Why does anyone stay? And for the life of me, I can't understand what people are obsessed with. Because to me, it's so obvious. Why does anybody stay with somebody that they love? You know, we've all been in relationships that, even if they weren't abusive, we're not working at home, and we want to stay for and it's, you stay for the same reasons. You stay because you love the person, or you love what you used to have, or you're trying to take care of your children. Let me ask, why did you stay? You know, we're blaming the victim for their abuse, as opposed to asking, why did you take this person? Or why are you violent? Or why do you feel the need to be violent? Why would somebody abuse? Why would somebody beat the people who love and or most of? Till we ask that question, we're not able to obliterate domestic violence. So we have got to focus on the perpetrators of violence, not the victims. It's cliche, but we never was better child. It's very fun, sweet. I left where I was hoping to come home. And I was alone. I got my job, so first fallout of physical attack was hunting to avoid what. Part of me knew I wasn't living right then, that I couldn't marry somebody who does. But then this other person was sleeping rings one time, and I told myself I would never do it again, and I was sure it was very sorry. I didn't leave. I married her. He stayed. I was scared. I was afraid. They would find me. I was afraid. He's so angry that I left. And he cried for me. I could just, wow. It was the most terrible thing to know that I could, but I still couldn't. Because I was bound by this psychological trap that I thought was life. It wasn't. But I had so much fun. It becomes more. It was my doctor that asked me what. That's right. I was a woman. I said, people have secrets. I stayed because I believed him. He said he wasn't going to do it. I stayed because I never went home. I didn't have access to nutrition. I stayed because my relationship was being I couldn't get divorced because God would be. I stayed because I loved him. I stayed because he was so much my life. I wanted to believe that I could Okay. So what are we thinking? Have you heard this before? Is this new to you? I mean, this is just a little bit. I want to shed some light on
give you some answers, because I'm sure that many of you are wondering too, why didn't they leave, right? Because it seems so easy for us looking in from outsiders. But the more stories you hear, the more you'll start to understand the dynamics and how complicated it can become to leave. Okay. So another aspect, the reason why we don't leave, why people don't leave an intimate partner relationship is shame. Have you ever felt shame before? And in what ways have you felt shame? I mean, we can feel shame for all sorts of things. Brené Brown, if you don't know who she is, you should definitely Google her. You can stop what you're doing right now and Google her, or just write her down real quick. Okay. Shame is the intensity, she says. It's Brené Brown. She studies shame and guilt. She gives a lot of presentations on it. Wonderful. Great woman. Anyway, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of accepting and belonging. I wish we were a class right now. We could just talk about this. Everybody experiences shame differently, but everyone experiences shame. One example is when a person's friend, family, or even community makes them feel like they don't belong because of how they look or act, or even how they identify. Shame can be felt physically. And this is like dry mouth, perspiration, a racing heart, tension throughout the body, and so much more. How we react to shame is influenced by our resiliency. If someone has a low tolerance to shame, they are more likely to act out in fear, blame, and disconnect. If someone has a higher resiliency towards shame, they're more likely to be aware and mindful of their triggers and react thoughtfully without letting it take over them. Individuals who have strengthened their resiliency to shame are able to offer and receive more empathy. Empathy is the ability to reflect on your own experience and connect with another person who is or has gone through a similar experience to yourself, as yourself. Now, we're going to go ahead and move to a different category, which is abusive behaviors and characteristics. Okay. Now, these are all common to persons who harm. If you've ever heard the term or phrase, hurt people, this is that, pretty much. It could be childhood trauma, unprocessed childhood trauma. Maybe they are abusing alcohol, substances. But again, alcohol and substance abuse is not the cause of domestic violence. It could escalate, take it to another notch, right? Or it could have a certain scenario, but there's still going to be power and control in other ways and manipulation. Okay. It could be a learned behavior. They themselves have low self-esteem, insecurities. They may be experiencing the blame, shame, and guilt game. They may have abusive nature or tendencies, gender stereotypes, social norms. They may feel like they don't really have any options. or they don't have the support that they need. They're trying to exert power and control over other people because they, I don't know why, right? There's a lot of reasons, but because of all these ones and more, right? So maybe in your own mind, you can kind of think about reasons why perpetrators of violence harm their partners. If you have some sort of epiphany, or you want to write something out, feel free to write it out and send it to me. Okay. Now, persons who harm come from all races, professions, socioeconomic classes, and physical sizes and appearances. So, this is supposed to be something that helps us dispel some type of stereotypical bias. So as I read these out loud, I want you to know that just because you know somebody who has some of these traits, or somebody who's violent, who doesn't have these traits, right? There's no one size fits all here. This is just general information about people who harm others. Okay, so I'll just read these off here. They have self-esteem issues. It may be too high of self-esteem. It might be too low of self-esteem. Okay. They believe in a traditional patriarchal family structure with dominant male as head of household. When we're talking about women being the victim of domestic violence, or male. They blame other people for their actions. They're pathologically jealous. They believe that their violent outbursts are justified. They have a need for absolute control. They fear being alone. They appear to lack guilt, shame, or remorse for their actions. They also have, or they may hide, that they have a lot of guilt, shame, or remorse over their action. They may deny allegations of abuse or become hostile when somebody brings it to their attention or confronts their behavior. They're manipulative, and they're oftentimes socially charming, which is the most dangerous part, right? So abusive behavior is learned behavior. And when you learn something, you can unlearn it, right? At the end of the day, it's not about anger. It's about power and control. Okay. Now, there are certain batterer intervention programs when perpetrators go through the court system. Generally speaking, they will need to take an anger management course. Sometimes this is something, taking an anger management course is like something that another partner can ask the abusive partner to do. And, depending on the program and how it works, this kind of behavior can be corrected. There is a group called Alternatives to Violence Project. Feel free to Google that real quick. And they actually go into the prisons and try to de-escalate kind of like the violent nature of jail or prison by providing people with the opportunity to talk about their childhood and talk about how violence has had an effect on their life. And this can really bring out the best in people. just providing a safe space for somebody to kind of flush some things out, you know, can help people have empathy for others. There's a lot that can be done. So if you know somebody, you know, don't plague them as a bad person. You got to have hope, right? That, well, and I don't mean to say that you have to have hope that abusive partner will correct that behavior with that intimate partner. No, that is not what I mean. What I mean is that if somebody is completely committed to changing their life around, I believe it can happen. Would I ever tell somebody to have faith that their partner is going to turn things around? Heck no, ever, no. But yes, so abusive behavior is learned and it can be unlearned. Okay, cool. The better intervention programs, right? They're going to be like educational classes, treatment groups, evaluation, case management, helps people get on their feet. You know. Now, some of the warning signs of abuse. We all want to be loved and we all want to share our love, right? But if you see or hear these kind of warning signs, especially from the beginning, red flags, and yeah, so warning signs: extreme jealousy, the relationship moves really quickly, there's isolation from friends and family, put downs and criticism and intentional embarrassment happen, somebody's being told what to do or how to dress, there's sexual pressure, somebody's calling and texting nonstop, or I mean, any form of physical harm is a big warning sign too of abuse. Now, when we talk about underserved populations, sorry, in this portion, we're going to be discussing how domestic violence affects our underserved populations. When we talk about underserved populations, I'm talking about vulnerable people. So, African American, Latina, Asian, Pacific Islander, non-white, right? They're going to be at a disadvantage. Somebody with a mental or physical disability, they're also going to be underserved. Okay. If they have access or functional needs, LGBTQ population, people with substance abuse issues, right? These are the underserved population. These are the people that we need to be gearing our domestic violence prevention act, right? And having resources to support, and we're going to get into that more. So there is inconsistency with the level of information that we have about intimate partner relationships in underserved populations. Why? Because we're not in them, right? And plus, when they do seek services, there's like these barriers where, you know, there will be stereotypes and discrimination that will seriously impact that person's ability to be successful in the process of leaving an intimate partner relationship that's violent, right? Plus, there are other aspects like cultural values, norms, and traditions that if we are not cognizant of those traditions of that other person, then we may subconsciously or unknowingly push that person away or not give them the resources that they need. So it's really important that we are paying attention to those that are not able to get the services that they need. Okay. Research shows that transgender and sexual people are transgender experience intimate partner violence at a greater rate of 28 to 33% more than non-trans people. Now, these are from 2016. So I would actually suspect that this is like significantly higher now. And if somebody wants to do their paper on that, we will be doing a paper on underserved population. And then we're going to be publishing those, to the group. So we can all learn a little bit more about different underserved communities. Anyway, the next quote from this training says, lesbian people and gay men reported levels of intimate partner violence and sexual violence equal to or higher than those of heterosexuals. Okay. Native American women are at far greater risk of becoming victims of violence than any other ethnic or racial group. This is due in part to the multi-layered effects of the jurisdictional maze, colonization, governmental policies such as assimilation and boarding schools, and the resulting loss of traditional culture. 2016 statistics say that 86% of perpetrators of sexually violent crimes against Native people are non-Native. Now, does this surprise you at all? Furthermore, women with disabilities have a 40% greater risk of intimate partner violence, especially severe violence, than women without disabilities. Can you assume why? Substance abuse has been found to co-occur in 40 to 60% of intimate partner violence incidences across various studies. Okay. I'm going to share one more video with you. Oops, here we go. There we go, there we go, there we go. Mm-hmm.
Abusers use many different strategies and tactics to control their survivor. The research on violence against deaf people is emerging, and the emerging research points to the fact that deaf people experience sexual violence and higher than ordinary counterparts. But the research is actually very limited. There really isn't any ongoing national data collection efforts that would allow us to say with certainty how much higher the rates of domestic sexual violence are against people who have many efforts that are being done in terms of research focused on people with disabilities, and they have not disentangled the deaf community from that research, and also don't use a cultural linguistic lens to understand the experiences of deaf survivors. As I mentioned, the emerging research does show an increase in the studies that have just been released that show that deaf people experience sexual violence at rates anywhere between 1 times or 2 times greater than counterparts. Related to barriers to deaf people and what deaf people face after they experience justified sexual violence, but most people have issues with the top issue and barrier challenge with different parts of communication and language access. It's categorized in several layers of space. It's consistent barrier and deaf people members. It's a message that we show people again and again. For example, when you go to court with a deaf person, what's your plan? And really protection. That means that these are file paperwork with the court, and medical surprise, to sit and wait. Sometimes wait for 1 hour. So by the time you join the workplace, they have to provide that process to get protection. Whenever this is the waiting room, the judge, the entire process, it doesn't take days or 2 weeks. But that's making the waiting room. I'm sorry, come back another day. So then they say, I'll just stop something like that. Where they can't communicate. So we have had the opportunity to work with many deaf advocates across the country who aim to close gaps for deaf survivors, and we have learned a tremendous amount from those deaf advocates in terms of the deaf survivors, and we want to take the lessons to a much broader audience. So our goal for this publication is to provide an understanding of the needs of deaf survivors through linguistic plans, and to begin to raise awareness about the barriers that deaf survivors face, and also to offer some very practical
Okay, guys. What do we think about this? Pretty interesting, huh? How many of you have thought about this before? See all the hands go up. Okay, so we're not gonna have a group discussion, but I do want you to think internally, you know, how might the considerations that were, the key considerations that were discussed in the video, how does that impact our work on as a domestic violence counselor, right? How does the fact that they don't have access to an interpreter all the time, right? I have to wait 1, 2, 3 hours just to get into an interpreter to come to the courthouse. Even in my line of work where I used to work, we had a deaf woman come in and she had to wait. She was sobbing and she needed to tell her story, but nobody could hear her. Nobody could understand her. And it was heartbreaking. But furthermore, right? So many deaf communities, they don't identify with having a disability. So in what ways do they identify, and why is it important that we actually recognize that some people don't, some deaf people don't identify as that being a disability? Should we not consider being deaf a disability? I mean, just think about it. Okay. Moving on. Now, vulnerable populations, teens, pregnant women, non-English speakers, LGBTQ male survivors are the ones that we're going to discuss today. Vulnerable groups are groups of people who may be more likely to experience domestic violence due to how they identify, what their age is, what their physical or medical circumstances are, and so on and so forth. So because of these populations have difficulty freeing themselves from abusive relationships. Being a part of a vulnerable group does not make one culpable for the abuse. So why do you think that these groups would be more vulnerable than others? Generally, I hear people say, what, pregnant women? I thought they were untouchable. You're wrong. We're going to get into that in a second. That's mainly the big ones. People say, what? All right, let's talk about it. All right. Where am I at? Where am I at? It said 46. All right. What is striking is that the prevalence of exposure to violence is already high among young women aged 15 to 19 years, suggesting that violence commonly starts early in women's relationship. 1 in 3 girls in the United States is a victim of physical, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner, a figure that far exceeds rates of other types of youth violence. Again, okay, these are 2013-14. Just by the sheer knowledge that I have that more people are coming forward and more people are more comfortable discussing intimate partner violence now more than before, I know that these statistics are higher. Now in 2015, there was nearly 21% of female high school students and 13.4% of male high school students report being physically or sexually abused by a dating partner. Okay. Now, when we talk about pregnancy and their risk of being, you know, a vulnerable population. Why do you think that is? It's not just that it's a red flag for increased abuse, right? But it's also a red flag that there's likely that the child, the baby in the womb, is also at risk, right? Each year, in 2013, each year, approximately 1.5 million women in the United States report a rape or physical assault by an intimate partner. This number includes as many as 324,000 women who are pregnant when violence occurs. 1/4 of adolescent females in abusive relationships report that their partner was trying to get them pregnant. Adolescents. When talking about pregnancy, violence during pregnancy has been associated with miscarriage, late entry into prenatal care, stillbirth, premature labor and birth, fetal injury, and low birth weights or small for gestational age infants. Now, there's a lot more information now about male survivors than there was. Let's see, this is 2014. So however many years ago that was. Okay, so 2014, it says 1 in 10 men have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner. Okay, in 2020, on 1in6.org, which is a great website, and I really would highly suggest that you all go visit that right now, because if we were in class together, I'd be there in a second. 1 in 6 men have experienced sexual assault or sexual abuse, whether in childhood or adult. So just to share some differences here, the first 1 in 10 is by an intimate partner, and 1 in 6 is just sexual assault or sexual abuse in general. Okay. So now when we talk about dynamics of domestic violence, of course, we're talking power and control, right? That is the end all be all. Okay. Love, hope, and denial. Denial that's happening. You have love for the person, hope you want them to change, right? There may be children involved. It's a very difficult and scary process to leave somebody who is violent. And health is also a major concern. Now, this is called the cycle of violence. This is also something that I use with every single one of my clients. So it starts with the honeymoon phase, okay? And then there may be little things that happen, small criticisms, maybe yelling or swearing here and there. And then there will be some sort of explosion, right? And it could be, it doesn't always have to be like a physical explosion. It could literally be like attacking somebody verbally, embarrassing somebody in public. Okay. Then the honeymoon says, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen again. And then the tension builds up, and then there's an explosion, right? So everything really seems fine in the honeymoon stage, right? And you hope that it's going to be fine in the honeymoon stage. But then when you get into the tension building stage, it's like the survivor's entire life may revolve around not making the person get to the explosion stage. Or it could be that they want to get the explosion stage really quickly because they know that little Timmy is coming home at 3 and it's 1 o'clock and she can tell that her husband is getting really angry with her. So she might do something to set him off so that he doesn't do it in front of the child, or that he doesn't take it out on the child. Okay. So somebody's entire life can revolve around these cycles of violence. And what ends up happening is the honeymoon stage gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So it just becomes explosion, tension buildings, explosion, tension building. And the violence gets more and more severe. I want to say always. I don't like the word always. But generally speaking, it gets worse and worse. Okay. Now, I really like to use the cycle of violence because it helps people to recognize that they may have, you know, been manipulated, or it's kind of a way for people to be validated on their experience. It also allows you an opportunity to connect with the client, because 9 times out of 10, there's a cycle, and generally it's recognizable. Okay. Trauma. I love to talk about trauma. So what is trauma? Cycle of violence and abuse survivors experience effects. People who've experienced domestic violence, sexual assault, cycles of violence, right? This is all going to have serious effects on not only the mental aspect, but your physical body as well. Renowned researcher Brené Brown describes trauma as not just physical harm to the body, but to the brain as well. It can result in lasting changes in the body and can elevate physical, emotional, and mental responses to a situation. The type of trauma a person experiences in domestic violence is different from, let's say, a car accident, because it happens repeatedly and it's also happening by somebody that the person loves. Victims who experience abuse go through the same fight, flight, or freeze, but at a higher rate and over a longer period of time. So this, in effect, can cause hyperarousal, okay, like being in constant fear of danger or being aggressive. Okay? It might come off as irritability or impulsiveness. It could be intrusion, like having repeated scenarios on a loop in the back of your mind. Maybe it results in dreams, right, or nightmares, I should say. Constriction, over exaggeration, or shutting down of somebody's language. Okay. In some cases, very strong emotional connections develop between the victim and the person causing the harm during an abusive relationship. This can result in the development of what's called Stockholm syndrome, which is traumatic bonding. Okay. So later on, we are going to get deeper into trauma and how trauma affects the brain. It's called Neurobiology of Rape Trauma Syndrome, and it is my favorite. But for now, we're going to talk about a couple aspects of the brain, the amygdala and the cerebrum. Each of these sections control a different function of the body. The amygdala is a small section of the brain that allows for humans to feel certain emotions. Its primary function is to respond to fear and danger. The cerebrum is a larger section of the brain that helps the brain think through and rationalize things. When someone is experiencing danger, the natural response for the brain to do is to shut down the thinking part and give all the energy into the amygdala. That is the amygdala is the part that responds to the danger. Okay, because brain wants to survive. Brain wants body to survive. Okay. Most individuals respond to danger in 3 different ways. There's the 4th one I just learned about recently, but generally it's fight, flight, or freeze. Most of you have probably heard that before. Once the brain is in this survival mode, other portions of the brain are shut down. And unfortunately, this also includes memory in some aspects. So if you've ever had or been in a dangerous situation, and you just reacted really quickly and didn't think about it, you've experienced this. I usually, save this story for the other presentation, but I will say, people react to trauma differently too. For instance, a friend and I were dropped off at the bus station, and we were waiting for my dad to come pick us up, and he was late. And so he had sent a friend and he said, it's going to be a minute. And we knew, well, we have some extra time. So of course we start walking around the neighborhood. We find an abandoned house, crawl inside, as kids do. We're like 8 and 9. And so my dad's friend gets there and he's driving a police car. Well, my friend and I knew that we were not supposed to be in that abandoned house, right? And she froze, deer in headlights, just couldn't move. And immediately I just took off. I was not about to wait and see what was going to happen, right? Joke was on me because it was my dad's friend, right? And it was very awkward trying to explain to him why I ran. But that's just to say, those are just like some examples of flight or freeze, fight, flight, or freeze. So I flew, my friend froze. Anyway, moving on. So trauma, it's not something that just affects you really quickly, like fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. It can affect somebody throughout the remainder of their entire life. Okay. It will affect interpersonal interactions, a person's ability to regulate emotions. It can get in the way of a person's relationships with other people or workplace. You have to be able to take critical feedback when you need to do something better, right? But the response to constructive feedback is going to be negatively affected by trauma. Generally speaking, everybody's different, right? We just talked about that. But the ability to screen out distractions, mental and physical well-being is also affected. Okay. It could look like somebody's being really cool and, they're detached and focused and, but deep down inside, they could be hurting. A survivor who's highly sensitive, it could also look like somebody who's like overly sensitive or somebody whose feelings get hurt a lot, right? Those are really different. They could have experienced the same thing. Or it could be somebody who seems untrusting or suspicious. And that could even include that those people who are suspicious are also suspicious of like shelter staff and other survivors if they end up going into the shelter. I'm sorry, I just got that. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. You guys know that one? If you don't, sorry. Anyway. Okay, so when somebody's experiencing trauma, imagine, right? You are talking to somebody for the first time and they've just gone through, they just fled their house, okay? So they may not be able to talk to you about what's happening, okay? They may not even recognize what's happening. They may not know what's going to happen or think that they have any options at all, okay? They may need some time to be alone, or they also may need to be comforted by somebody. They may feel too upset or overwhelmed to interact. They may not want to express their needs because they don't feel safe enough. They may want to protect you and not tell you what's happening because they don't want that burden to be on you. Now, go ahead and you can look at these questions, but there is a document entitled Tita Case Study or Case Study Tita. And I want you to read through that and answer these case study questions. Okay. Between now and the end of the week, I will put up the answers, but it will not be tonight. Anyway, so that's your homework. Let me see. I also have some. Okay, and then go ahead and you can review Dr. Anderson's personal story about domestic violence and fleeing domestic violence and what that looked like for her. There's like a set of 10 questions. You have to answer 5. And then the last, I think 3 or 4 are like you just pick one. So that is your homework. There is some reading. So take a look there too. And I think that's it. So I will see you guys next time. I will be hosting office hours starting how about next week? I promise that I will start office hours next week. And if you are somebody who has a very tight schedule, let me know. Right now, I'm thinking of office hours as being Friday between like 10 a.m. to 12:45. If that wouldn't work for you, let me know. I might be able to do like 2 sessions of office hours. I'm not quite sure yet. So bear with me. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Okay, see ya.